Alrighty, so we're moving on to example 2. Before we go over this, there was a list on your homework of things that I told you guys needed to have memorized. That list is right here. Essentially, this first one is called the cycle. Essentially, if you have a log equation, you can rewrite it as, I'm going to show you the cycle. So it's a raised to the y, a raised to the y, is equal to x. Okay, so that's the cycle. So you use the cycle whenever you have one log, whether that's ln or log, and an equal sign. Okay, this is super important. Everything on this board is super important. Okay, so you use the cycle whenever you have one log, whether that's log or ln for the natural log, and an equal sign. You need both of them. One log and an equal sign, you can do the cycle. Okay. Here, we have our multiplication. So whenever you have multiplication or division, think about what's easier. We have adding and subtracting, right? And we have multiplying and dividing. Out of adding and subtracting, adding's easier. Out of multiplication and division, multiplication's easier. So the multiplication goes with the adding one. That's a good way to remember it, okay? And the division goes with the subtraction one. Another way that I like to remember, if it's on the top, it's positive, and if it's on the bottom, it's negative. Okay, so this m is on the top because there is no fraction, so the log is positive. This n is also on the top, so the log is positive. This m is on the top, so it's positive. This n is on the bottom, so the log is negative. Okay, and then over here we have the power. Whenever you have a power for exponentials, you're actually able to move it to the front, so that's where that p comes from. Or you can reverse it and move the p back up as a power. Okay, and the last one we have our change of base. Essentially, I'm going to leave off these little letters. Essentially, whenever you're working with log, that is the same thing as saying base 10. Okay, so if you're looking on your calculator, and you see log, that's an automatic base 10. If you have a calculator like this and it says log box, you can change your base. The base is that little number, okay? But if a little number doesn't show up, it's always base 10, okay? If you're working with ln, that's always base e. So let's say you had a problem that didn't have a base 10 or a base e. So that means you couldn't use your calculator unless you had this fancy calculator. Most of you guys probably aren't going to have this fancy calculator, so you don't have this button. So this change of base is going to be super, super important to you guys, okay? So essentially, what you do is you take the little number, not in size, I mean in subscript. You see how this b is like tiny in size, and you put it on the bottom. And then you take the big number, because it's like more important, and you stick it on the top, okay? So now, let's look at some examples. So for this first one, it says, I've actually written them over here, so we can kind of use it as needed. Okay, so for this first one, we have log 10, 10,000. So there's multiple ways to go about this. It doesn't really matter how you solve it as long as you get to the answer, okay? Here we can either use number 1 or we could use number 5. I'm going to do it both ways just to show you guys. If we do it way 1, that's the cycle, right? We can only use the cycle when we have one log and an equal sign. There isn't an equal sign, so I'm going to add an equal sign, and then I'm going to put a question mark. So we're looking for a question mark. So now that I have one log and an equal sign, I can do the cycle. So 10 raised to the question mark is equal to 10,000. 10 raised to what is equal to 10,000. So hopefully you can figure that out on your own. If you can't, you can take your calculator, you do your 10, you raise it to the power, and you can just kind of start guessing. If let's say you thought it was 2, you get 100, so that's not it. And then you just keep going up until you find the number. So y'all see how to the 4th gives you the 10,000? So that means question mark is equal to 4. So that would be the answer, okay? Or we could use number 5, sorry. Number 5. We have base 10. Oh, or we could just use our calculator, right? Remember that on your calculator, if it just says log by itself, that's an automatic base 10. So you could have just hit log and typed in 10,000 to get the answer 4, okay? But let's just say that wasn't a base 10, then you could not do that. So for instance, you can use that for B, but you cannot use that for C because there's a 2 there, okay? So yeah, let's actually just stop there. So way 1 we could have used, or we could have just used our calculator and plugged it straight in using the log button, okay? Because we have a base 10, right? Okay, over here, again, we can use our calculator because we have a base 10. So we hit the log, and then we type in 0.01, and we get -2, okay? So we know that the answer is -2. Now, if you have the fancy calculator, you can use this button and plug those in. I'm gonna assume that most of you guys do not, so that's why I'm gonna show you how to work all these without using that, okay? But anyway, so let's say you wanted to use way 1. Way 1 is our cycle. We can only use the cycle when there's one log and an equal sign. I'm gonna add an equal sign and put a question mark. So 10 raised to what gives me this number? So 10 raised to what gives me 0.01. Okay, if we were to write 0.01 as a fraction, what would that be? 1 over 100, right? So that's the same thing as 1 over 100. That's just 1%, right? So now, the difference here is that that number is on the bottom. Remember how we talked about reciprocals and making the exponents negative? So essentially 10 raised to what would give you 100? That's 2, right? So we know that 10 raised to the 2 is 100, which means that 10 raised to the -2 has to be 1 over 100 because it's the reciprocal. Does that make sense? So again, our answer here would be -2, okay? On number 2C, again, we could use way 1, where we say log 2/8 is equal to what? 2 raised to what gives me 8. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. So we know that the answer is 3. Okay? You could not use your calculator here because your base is not a 10, okay? Unless you have this fancy calculator that has a change of base where you can put a baby 2, then you cannot use your calculator, okay? But you could use way 5, which is your change of base, because it's not a 10. So we'll have log on the top and a log on the bottom. Remember, because it's a subscript 2, it goes on the bottom, not because it's a smaller number. And because in size, like written size, this 8 is bigger, it goes on the top. And now with your calculator, you can do the fraction. We can do log 8. Make sure you close your parentheses on all of these. And log 2, close parentheses. And again, we get 3. So either way works, however you want to solve the problems.